Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Perspective. We'll be talking about the upcoming budget and of course the politics on the upcoming budget, but it started already between the government and the opposition, of course, playing its role. What does this mean for till the upcoming budget? What are the ramifications of the kind of grouping that has started now at this time? What kind of a pull does the opposition hope to have over this scenario? We also saw Shehbaz Sharif, we also saw a certain movement within the PMLN, the negation of PPP being within the PDM, all of that today on Perspective. Imran Khan, of course, the Prime Minister, has said that as far as economy is concerned, as far as economic growth of Pakistan is concerned, things are certainly on track and Pakistan is garnered to have an exemplary growth in the next year. He said Pakistan's economic turnaround has brought down the curtains on bad days and heralded a time for economic growth, wealth creation and jobs for youth. He also said, I believe we've gone through the worst time. Inshallah, in the upcoming days, Pakistan's growth will not be turbulent with up and down cycles. Pakistan will start its journey from when it was fourth largest economy in Asia in 1968 after Japan, China and India. Certainly, the Prime Minister is hopeful, optimistic. What is the kind of scenario we can expect before the budget, and what can we expect the budget to sail forward in the next couple of days? I have with me Javed Jadoon, who's a political analyst. Thank you for joining us today. Ghazala Saifi, MNA with PTI. Thank you for joining us today. And Dr. Niaz Murtaza, who's a political analyst. Thank you for being with us today. Javed Sahab, let's start off with you. Do you think, I mean, you've heard what the Prime Minister expects, hopes for the economy, his hopes for economy in the next year. How do you see the situation today in terms of politics and in terms of economy vis-a-vis the budget now?
Thank you very much, Mahrukh. I think there's a lot of optimism on part of the PTI government and particularly Prime Minister Imran Khan, what he has said. But I think my optimism would be a little guarded one because given the situation in Pakistan and globally as well in the wake of coronavirus pandemic and economy getting hit everywhere in the world, including the most strong and most advanced economies in the world, including in the USA and in Europe as well. So, and secondly, Mahrukh, whenever there is a budget, there is a lot of a talk on part of the opposition and government, which of course would like to give everything possible given the resources and given the financial allocations and the strength of economy as well. I don't see why any given government would not like to facilitate the people and would try to lessen the burden of the taxes, direct or indirect. On the contrary, when opposition talks about sort of giving relief to the people, I think they have the luxury to say that because while sitting on the opposition benches, they can afford to do that. But any government, I'm talking about any government, not only the PTI government.
I want to come to that. I think that's a very interesting thing that you've said, because the cycle, so to speak, that we're dealing with at this time is not really different from the cycle that happens with every government. You know, there's a lot of criticism about the fact that the government goes to the IMF, there is a painful process, the rupee is devalued, all of that, and that happens, and after a while we see the physical and current account deficits shrink, reserves climb, and the government seems to be doing better. But then things, you know, there's that whole cycle again, and things don't really pick up unless, you know, we talk about Musharraf's government or the other, which had different reasons for doing well. One of them being the funding that was coming from abroad. Why does that happen? I want to go into that and I want to talk more about that. I'm going to come back to you. I'm going to go to Ghazala Saifi. Ghazala, why does that happen? I mean, we've seen with other successive governments also, there's nothing new with the fact that, you know, there's a cycle that repeats itself. There is, of course, the IMF, and then the rupee is devalued, all of that follows. After a while, the government, the growth picks up, but it doesn't really translate. Are things going to be different this time round? Ghazala, I think there's a problem with your audio. I can't hear you. Maybe you're muted.
Yeah, can you hear me now? Hello, can I be heard?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Sorry for that. Mahrukh, the thing is that whenever there is a budget, when it's already in place now and we're going to have the budget presented to the people of Pakistan and in the parliament, the only thing is that there are speculations always before the budget, and this time more so because throughout last year and year before last, when we have seen the COVID coming in, and along with the COVID, without realizing how difficult the situations have been economically all over the world, and all the countries have suffered economically because of the COVID situation. Our country tried within the given parameters, tried to struggle and bring sustainability within the given time, within the given problems. Apart from that, the budget is going to happen, and there is a promise which has come in that it is going to have a trickle-down effect on the people of Pakistan, and a lot of people are going to have a lot of advantage from this budget. It's not going to be a budget against the people, it's going to be a budget for the people, but they will be, like we've heard from the finance minister, that there are going to be more taxes imposed, because you see a large chunk of our people do not pay taxes, and it is imperative on those who do not pay taxes and have a lavish life, have to share their responsibility and have to.
Do you think, Rala, do you think that the government, of course, tax has been something that has been really important for this government from day one, and there is a lot of talk about that. The Prime Minister focused on that to a large extent. But do you think those reforms have been able to bring, if they've been able to bring about any change? As of this, at this time, during this budget, we will be able to feel any of the effects of the move by the government to bring in more tax?
Well, the taxes, yes, a large number of people have now been inducted in the tax arena, and they have been paying taxes, which is a surplus for the Pakistani government, and it is going to improve with more taxes coming in, which is a legal way of giving a percentage of their wealth for the well-being of the country. Apart from that, a lot of other initiatives have taken place. A lot of other indicators are there which show that Pakistan is becoming economically sound in the passage of time, and we can see in the future also we'll see that Pakistan will be going forward in a lot of different areas which will affect the lives of poor people and will give a positive impact on the people of Pakistan.
Right, let me come back to you. Niyaz Sahab, how do you see the situation as of today? We may talk about a trickle-down effect, we may talk about controlling inflation, which the government has been doing for a while, we may talk about, bringing in more taxes, but how do you see the situation today?
Well, the situation remains, worrisome. I know there's been, this figure released of about 3.9% growth rate. Let's remember it's a provisional figure based on 9 months data. That's how, it works, that you first announce a provisional figure, and then after a few months a final figure is announced. And in the last 2 years, the provisional figure went down considerably. In the first year of PTI, it was slashed by 50% from 3.3% to 1.7%, and to some extent even last year. So let's see where we end up. But then, even if you look at these figures, what you see is that, the highest growth rate is in service sector, which is 4.4%, and the lowest one is in industry, which is 2.2%. Now, industry is supposed to be, the growth engine of countries like Pakistan, where you get a lot of jobs for the poor people, laborers, etc. So that is stagnant. And the problem with Pakistan is that we've had premature serviceization of the economy. Service sector is about 60% already, which is huge for a country like Pakistan. That's more like for developed countries. And
why do you think we haven't?
stagnated.
Do you think it's the policies? If you look at, like you're saying, the situation, the industrial sector at this time, the way things are, is it the policies? Of course, if you talk to the government, I'm sure Ms. Saiba will say that it's also a lot of inherited problems, and that wouldn't be wrong.
Well, if there are inherited problems, then, the performance shouldn't be lower than before. Now the situation is, if you look at foreign direct investment, for example, the numbers have gone down even compared to 2018, pre-2018 situation. You have a lot of remittances coming in, but, foreign direct investment is going down. But what is the effect of remittances? It helps you solve your foreign exchange constraint to some extent, but then, it all goes into consumption. So what is happening, the other problem with our economy beyond the servicization is that, it's based too much on consumption. About 85% of our GDP is, consumption. Whereas for other countries like South Korea, etc., investment is about 35–40%. So what is happening? Investment is going down, remittances are going up, remittances are fueling consumption, the production is not increasing, and that's one of the reasons that you see inflation. So, it's a lot of, the PMLN got 5.5% by, manipulating the external deficit, the current account deficit, by keeping rupee overvalued and so on, and that's why we had the crisis then. Now, PTI doesn't have that option because of the IMF program, so what it is doing, it's manipulating the other deficit, which is the fiscal deficit. And on the tax situation, the taxes in the first 2 years were flat, 3.9 trillion, what PMLN left with, and this time they are, gone up. You might have seen the figure, 4.1 trillion, unprecedented. That's still a very low growth. But the expenditure.
But it's not less than 1%, which was something that the government was fearing.
Well, the 4.1% should have happened in the first year of PTI. Nothing to celebrate if it's happening now. By now, we should have crossed 5 trillion. If the growth that had been sustained in the PMLN period had been sustained, we should have been over 5 trillion by now. So, it's just a short-term stimulus, fiscal stimulus, the way previous governments have been able to stimulate economy, starting from Musharraf with the American money, and then, with PMLN, with, the external deficit manipulation. There's no fundamental reform, say, on the state enterprises, on, your circular debt, on FBR, on export. It's just short-term measures. So, the big thing about this government is the construction sector. That is supposed to be the engine of growth. Wherever, the construction sector becomes the engine of growth, it creates bubbles. The 1998 East Asian crisis happened because, there was all this investment in construction sector, and it wasn't backed by industrial growth, so everything collapsed. So, it's just short-term manipulation of, whatever tools are available with the government.
Right.
And
now, sir, I'll come back to you. Do you agree?
Yeah, Mahrukh, I think I would like to make two important points here. One is we always talk about the phenomenal growth rate during PMLN's tenure, but we fail to understand that who really benefited when PMLN was in power. Only the business class, the shopkeepers and the traders. While on the contrary, the educated middle class of Pakistan was literally crushed under the weight of multiple layers of direct and indirect taxes. And in any given society, in any given country, I think the educated middle class matters a lot. It is always considered an engine of growth, not the shopkeepers who do not even pay taxes.
So who is benefiting now, in your opinion?
I think probably now I feel that the focus of the government has shifted from the traders and shopkeepers and the business class. I'm not talking about the industrialists and manufacturers. I'm talking about the medium and the mid-range, the businessmen in Pakistan. Focus seems to be shifting towards the middle class, educated middle class. When you talk about when you talk about the lower middle class and the people falling below the poverty line, they are definitely benefiting during the PTI tenure because of some of its programs. The SAS program and the BIS, of course, has been augmented. But comparisons are given when between the two governments. It is, I think, ironical that we very conveniently tend to forget about the figure fudging done by Mr. Isakdar when he was the finance minister. And I think it was acknowledged by the IMF as well. When we talk about the initial years of President Musharraf, IMF was about to impose a penalty of over $350 million because of the figure fudging.
The dollar rate going down and then going up. There was a lot of hype about that also, that look, it's going down and the government seems to be doing better. Again, it has gone up. Does the government, I mean, what does that say about the policies at this time? We talk about figure fudging of the last government and all of that, but what about this government?
I think figure fudging is absolutely unfortunate and unacceptable because in modern economies you don't do that. If you do that, you're caught. When you're caught, of course, you're penalized as well by the international financial institutions, and you lose the credibility as far as the people are concerned. So figure fudging is absolutely unacceptable.
Let's move towards...
You're talking about what is happening now.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly. I don't have the data where the figures are being fudged as far as the projected economic growth is concerned. Because I'm a little concerned about that. Why? Because the IMF projection was 1.7% for the 2021 financial year ending in June, and the World Bank was 1.3. So I think there's a huge gap between those two projections and the projection given by the finance ministry.
Now.
So I think, let us see.
Let's ask Ghazala. I'll come back. Ghazala, what about this discrepancy? What was expected and what is now? The government is saying up to about 4%, if I'm not wrong.
Well, as far as the discrepancy of dollars are concerned, I didn't get your answer.
No. We're not talking about any discrepancy regarding the dollar. The figures as far as projected growth rate is concerned, what was expected by the World Bank and the IMF and what is now the government saying. There's a huge gap there because, we're talking about less than 1%.
1.3, 1.7.
1.3, 1.7 and the government is saying up to by about 4%. So which is it?
Well, actually, we have just heard in the news about an hour ago that the IMF, whatever the 40 points that were to be assessed, out of those 31 points, Pakistan has been able to bring itself up to the mark, which is a big achievement for Pakistan and which has never happened before in previous governments also. So whichever government has taken any loans from IMF had to follow certain restrictions and certain norms, and Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf government has been able to bring its level to the perfection to 31 points, the index which is a big achievement, and they have been able to do so. And as far as assessment is concerned, like Mr. Niaz Murtaza was saying, it is just a matter of 9 months. But you see, we have seen COVID, we have seen economic governments going economically crashing all the big economies, and in this particular country where we had the biggest difficulties when we started off, and taking it off to this level and bringing it to this point, where after all the adversities and after all the difficulties we've been able to bring it up to 0.4. I mean, that is something which should be commendable and which should be respected, and I think in the coming years we'll be able to see a better performance, and hopefully we'll be getting rid of COVID soon, and it won't be just according to most of the analysts. What they are saying is that the government...
Ghazala, you mentioned the trickle-down effect. When do you think we'll see? Because inflation has been a cause of concern for this government. The Prime Minister has taken numerous notices. Do you think that people will be able to feel?
Food inflation still hovering around.
There were a lot of measures taken by the government to bring the inflation down. There were a lot of protests, a lot of basic things which are needed by the common man. The prices were brought down. there was a fluctuation in the middle. A lot of agricultural products have also improved in their production, which is something which should also be appreciated, and that is in the agriculture area, and also in the development side. We have seen the boom in the construction industry, and because of that a lot of other industries will take off and are taking off. So it does have a trickle-down effect. People will not go jobless. People will have better living standards.
You expect inflation to decrease in the recent future? You expect inflation to decrease in the upcoming days?
Well, I think yes, because a lot of effort has been taken and has been done by the Prime Minister and his team to bring the inflation down. You will be able to see a lot of product prices going down. Some will take a while, but a lot will come down, inshallah.
Now, sir, do you think that will happen? What are the expectations? Because I think Javed Saab mentioned food inflation, and I think that's definitely a cause for concern for the common man. If we look at what's happening as far as poultry is concerned, as far as everyday items are concerned, certainly everyday utilities are concerned, things haven't gone down.
Well, I think, there have been good crops this year, bumper crops on most major items. So that should be one problem less, but still, I think the general expectation is...
Considering the severe water crisis at this time, I mean, we have to be a little skeptical about what we can expect as far as agriculture is concerned also.
Yeah, no, but if you look at, the figures that the government is claiming, it's claiming bumper crops. Now, of course, let's see when the final figures come, what is the situation. But inflation is expected to remain high in the coming months because of, the large fiscal deficit. Then, oil prices are also starting to rise because, the global economy is recovering. Then, the remittance effect that I spoke about, and the fact that investment is stagnant. So I think it's going to remain a problem in the foreseeable future, and that will remain a big challenge. And then the other challenge is creating jobs, because industry is still, suffering, and service sector doesn't employ that many people.
Let's move on. Let's move on towards the politics side of things vis-a-vis the budget. What are your expectations? We've seen a lot of grouping happening. We've seen a lot of demands, of course, being made from the government, which is not unusual at this time of the year. Do you think that there will be, what can we expect in the next couple of days vis-a-vis that? Because we've seen, of course, the government trying to reassure its own members. Do you think there will be more grouping?
Well, there's a lot of juggling act involved here. There's all the demands from, their own constituencies, because, they've got nothing in the last 2 years. In fact, this is the third year now. So, there's a lot of pressure to, have a growth-oriented budget. Then, there is the pressure from IMF. So I think there is some indication from IMF that they may be willing to relax, some of the constraints that they were earlier talking about in terms of, how much more taxes need to be imposed, and then, the electricity charges. So it's all still in a flux. There is more pressure. I mean, the opposition can't do anything to stop the budget. They don't have the number. But the pressure is coming from within PTI and its allies, and then, the Jahangir Tareen group. But if you ask me to take a guess, I think ultimately the government will be able to get the budget passed, and there may be some relaxation from the IMF on, the taxation issue.
Now, sir, on that note, we'll be coming back after a short break. Right, welcome back. We'll be talking about the budget vis-a-vis the political grouping also that's been happening closer to the budget, and what are the effects and ramifications this may have on the budget itself. Javed, what about the JKT group led group and the fact that of course they've been asking for concessions, they've been asking. Do you think that this will, of course, probably lose its nuisance value after the budget? They can probably hope for whatever concessions they can till that time. Isn't that true?
I think, Mahrukh, if you look at the political landscape holistically, you'll find out that it's not only the PTI which is suffering from groupings and the internal dissensions and the fissures. Even the opposition parties are suffering the same kind of a crisis, because Pakistan has suffered a lot because of the lack of ideological leanings as far as our political parties are concerned. If you look at the manifestos of major political parties, you will hardly find any difference between them. Because why? They are not leaning towards right, neither leaning towards left, nor the centrist parties, nor the ideologically directionless political parties. I think that is the reason. When you talk about getting into the corridors of power, you talk about getting the support of the electables. Electables, they are the kind of commodities which can be sold in the market. You can buy the loyalties of the electables anytime. If you have the right resources and the right approach and the right support from the establishment, you can get them, you can get their support, you can form the government. So I think the problem is probably quite deep rooted in Pakistan's politics. So you see a lot of, even when you look at the kind of implosion we saw as far as PDM was concerned, because PDM main political parties got together because they wanted to de-seat the sitting government in Islamabad, and ultimately they developed the kind of differences which people failed to understood. Why? Because you have very I think very shallow kind of differences, the clash of personalities, not the ideological clashes, but the personality centered clashes took place. And Pakistan People's Party and the other political party left the alliance, leaving it literally redundant, because then you lose two main political parties. The main thrust against the government is lost. Same thing happened with the PDM. Now PDM is directionless. The talk of resignations is no more there. The talk of long marches and the dharnas in Islamabad, the capital city of the country, is no more there. Maulana Fazal, he talks about, still believes that the resignation is the only way forward. But I don't see Pakistan Muslim League agreeing to this particular approach or strategy to go for the mass resignations, because they believe that when they go for that and the People's Party doesn't tender resignations from the Provincial Assembly and the National and the Senate, the National Assembly and the Senate, they would be creating the kind of vacuum which could be fulfilled by other forces or independent candidates or support. This is what they believe, the candidates supported by the establishment, etc., etc. So these confusing signals have basically left the people of Pakistan bewildered, because they don't see any move forward as far as PTM is concerned. Well, I think PTI at the end of the day is very comfortable now. They would be able to pass the budget, I think, without any hindrance. So we hear the talk of Jahangir Tareen Group, but I don't see Jahangir Tareen Group creating any impediments or roadblocks as far as the passage of a budget at the federal level and the provincial assembly, provincial level is concerned. So at the end of the day, I see budget passing from Islamabad, National Assembly and the provincial assembly in Punjab as well. So I think they might get some concessions as well. Now there's less talk of dissensions. They are quite, I think, seems to be.
But how relevant do you think they'll remain, after the budget? Let's look at that.
Mahrukh, the reason is they are not ideologically embedded in the PTI. They were mostly independent candidates, and they can take a flight whenever there is a nice opportunity.
There doesn't seem to be a lot of ideological embedding within our political scenario anyway.
In every political party. I think in every political party. So it's
all about who gets what. And
exactly. It is the piece of the pie they're going to get at the end of the day. And Jahangir Tareen group seems to be a little quieter right now, probably because of the backdoor communications or channels they have been probably assured.
Let's discuss this a little bit. Why do you think that there is such a lack of ideological, belief? Why is it all about getting what? It's not that most most countries all over the world, but more so in Pakistan. Why do you think that is?
I think this is a very interesting question, Mahrukh. If you look at the two main political parties, let's talk about them, Pakistan Muslim League N and the People's Party. PMLN, we have seen their strategy, blow hot, blow cold. They talk against the establishment, and then they talk about
they try to be ideological
context and the backdoor channels as well.
Right.
So this is the kind of politics we have seen as far as this major political party is concerned in Pakistan. So what kind of a signals, messages they are sending to the people that they do not have any ideological embedding as far as Pakistan is concerned? They can go for the benefits, they can go for the maximum concessions when they talk of creating context with the establishment, front door or back door. It is legitimate, it is acceptable. Same is the case with PTI, Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf. Imran Khan, when he was in opposition, sitting in the D-choke, he was talking about creating context with creating back channels and the front channels with the establishment and Pakistan Army as well. So why they keep looking towards the establishment? At the end of the day, people start believing that establishment has the key role in the formation of every government in Pakistan, and this is the message which is being strengthened by these political parties. One of the very important leaders in PMLN, he is the spokesperson as well. He said on one of the talk shows that now our things are quite better. We have established some communications, and he didn't say war or conflict, but some kind of words in Urdu. He said that meant that now they have mended fences with the army leadership. So on one hand you talk about vote ko izzat do, you talk about minimum role of the establishment in Pakistan Army, and you talk about the institutions working within the given parameters, but then you give a very conflicting message, and the message is that without the support of the establishment, you can't form a government. So I think it's because of the lack of ideologies in political parties and lack of democracies as well in political parties.
Yes, I think that's also very relevant. Ghazala, do you agree? You think there is? I mean, of course, if you talk about ideology, PTI is one of those political parties which came with the highest ideology behind them, the slogan of change and all of that. Why do you think that has been mitigated to a certain extent because of the narrative overall on the establishment, or no? Ghazala, can you hear me? No, I think you're muted. Ghazala, can you hear me? Okay, I think you're muted. Okay, I will come back to you. I'm going to go to Nayasab. Nayasab, we're discussing the absence of ideology in across the board all political parties, and the reason why there is that kind of lack of ideology. Of course, establishment being one factor, and the narrative now that's very open. We saw the way PMLN brought it out, and it was discussed like never before. The fact that there is an establishment, the fact that that establishment is very active, the fact that that's the anti-establishment narrative, and instead of making it more ideological, it seems to have done the reverse.
Yeah, well, the reason for the lack of ideology is what we spoke earlier.
Yeah.
The echo.
Sorry. I think there's a problem with the practice. Javed sir, let's continue. In terms of ideology, look at PTI. I mean, you also mentioned, you're saying that it's also about democracy within the political parties. And we saw what happened, with the PMLN, of course. Even at this time, we're seeing Maryam Nawaz and Shehbaz Sharif. There's this whole well, not war, but there's that tension, there's that every few days there seems to be the movement there, who's going to lead. So there's like passing the buck between, it's a family affair. that kind of dynamic, it's very much there within the PPP also. The PTI, well, not so much, but are we seeing democracy there?
You're right, Mahrukh, that if you take the example of PMLN and PPP, definitely they have got a dynastic politics, and it runs within the families, and the respective families have been at the helm of the two main parties, and they are the people who are the decision makers. And rest they simply follow. There is no democracy. There are no discussions and no political brainstormings in these two main political parties. Whatever, I think every major and minor leader in PMLN has been stating that whatever is decided by our supreme leader would be accepted and would be followed, despite the fact they do have certain differences as well. That is lack of democracy. And same is with the PPP, Mrs. Zardari and Mr. Bilawal Bhutto. Whatever they say is the ultimate word, and they would be deciding whichever direction party is going to take in the coming elections. And many second or third tier leaderships are totally they are totally blind. They do not even know what is being discussed there, what is being decided there. When the decision comes, they simply follow. No dissensions and no disagreements. And given the fact that PTI doesn't have the dynastic politics, but I think if you look at the system and the hierarchy of the party, you see there is only one supreme leader, and that is Imran Khan. He is the party. They have been saying that Imran Khan is PTI and PTI is Imran Khan. It doesn't happen everywhere. It doesn't happen in major democracies. Individuals are not the parties, and the parties are important, and the individuals keep on changing. When we talk about the parliamentary form of democracy, I think British democracy is the best example to quote. There you see, we don't even know who is the head of the party. The prime ministers come and go, but the party goes on.
Remain, right. Gee, here it's very much, who's the prime minister, who's at the helm of affairs with every political party. It's a one-man show, so to speak, or one family show. Gee, Ghazala, do you think that there is lack of the lack of ideology at this time has to do with the lack of democracies between political parties, within political parties?
You are talking with reference to PTI or other parties as well?
I'm talking across the board. Political parties in Pakistan at this time are suffering from lack of ideology. Do you agree?
Well, to some extent, yes. But then Pakistan has had a very small democratic age, and it has to go through the process. And there hasn't been too many years when we have experienced democratic process. It's the third party taking a tenure and is struggling to finish off the tenure and would successfully be able to do so. So once the process continues and the people realize that the public representation comes through voting, voting has to come through the right means, no unfair means should be considered while the votes are counted. Therefore, the electoral reforms are important. The party will become stronger with the vote of the people. The representation would be better in the parliament if people have respect for the electoral reforms. So all those things are are on their way, and slowly and gradually things will be put in place. But at the moment, we will see that if a leader, like Imran Khan, who doesn't want his family members to be a part of the political scenario, obviously we have Shah Mahmood Qureshi, we have Asad Umar, we have other leaders also in the party who can also represent the party, and the chairman can sit and monitor. But it will time. It is a process that we are into. The democratic process will continue, and there is no revenge as far as democracy is concerned. It's a proper representation of people, and only then will we have a proper trickling down effect once the democratic process is fully established and people start to respect their own preferences for the parties that they have chosen, and they will have to see the results in those 5 years in progress and in stability, which will definitely come over the years. So I think there is no non-ideological case in any way, but yes, the hierarchy should not be according to the relationship with the person, that is the wife or the daughter or the son or a brother or a sister, but it should come through merit and
your
through
comments.
proper
Unfortunately, we're running out of time. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Ji Niyaz Sahab, unfortunately we're running out of time. I want to move on. Ji Niyaz Sahab.
Yeah, well, the issue of internal democracy, it's obvious that, there isn't much in terms of formal democracy where you would have, a fully empowered central executive committee and issues come there, voting takes place. That doesn't happen. But then neither are, the leaders complete dictators. They still have to listen to the wishes of the electables. They can't ignore them, and obviously that doesn't happen within the central executive committee. That happens through, backdoor, discussions and negotiations. So there is, some check and balance in that sense, that they can't completely ignore the electables. But yeah, the formal democratic process is lacking, and of course all of that has to do with the state of the economy. It's not a merit-based economy. Most people are uneducated, so it's going to take a while for the kind of situation we have in the developed countries, several decades.
Right. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have. Thank you so much for joining us today, Javed Zadoon Saab. Thank you for being with us. Ghazala Saifi, thank you for joining us today. Dr. Niaz Murtaza, thank you for being with us today. As the situation stands today, the government seems to be confident on the budget. As far as the budget is concerned, we will, of course, in the next couple of days know more as far as grouping is concerned, as far as tensions within political parties is concerned. That also seems to be across the board, not just limited to the government. But the figures